So last week we looked at the significant uncials, and they're manuscripts of the New Testament. And remember, there's different kinds of styles of writing Greek. The uncials are the oldest. They're the capital letters. So they're the oldest ones. So if you ever happen to stumble upon an ancient vellum and it's got capital letter Greek, then you're talking about something that was hand printed somewhere before 500 AD. So it's old stuff. So anyway, that's what we looked at. And there's some significant ones. Remember they had coding systems, how to keep track of them? There's the Aleph on the bottom. That's the A in the Hebrew alphabet. Aleph, A, B. We'll mention C in passing today. And they also have a number system, just to kind of confuse you. So anyway, so when translators make notes about what they're talking about, they always just use that little code thing. So the top one, B, is the Vatican manuscript. A for Alexandrian. Aleph for Sinaitic. So it's kind of easy to remember. Aleph is Hebrew. Sinai is where they got the Ten Commandments. Aleph, right? A for Alexandria. B for Vatican. That's how I remember. Yeah, the Vatican. Yeah, which actually, it's actually Hebrewism because the vowel sound B and V in Hebrew are somewhat interchangeable. So ben, ven, v, it's like a ven, so it's kind of interesting. Anyway, yeah, we don't do that. So today we're going to look at just that one, the Sinai one, because its history is just fascinating, and it is without question, almost everyone will admit that without question, it's probably the most important manuscript that we have. I mean, by a lot. And we'll talk about why that is in a second. But the story of how it came to be is what's really fascinating. So here's some of the history. In 1841, this guy here, Konstantin von Tischendorf, who was like a Bible scholar, up and coming at the time, he decided to publish a Greek New Testament. So New Testament in Greek, which means he had to have sources for his Greek. He had a lot of good sources, but it made him wonder in the process of compiling that published Greek New Testament, it made him wonder how many Greek manuscripts are still languishing around the world. So he decided after doing that, that he would go on a worldwide tour until his money ran out to find all the languishing Greek manuscripts around the world. So he went all over Europe and Turkey and stuff like that, which is how he eventually got to the Sinai. So he does that, and he eventually ends up, after going all through Turkey and the eastern part of Europe and stuff like that, he gets to the convent of St. Catherine, and he finds them burning manuscripts that have capital letter Greeks on them, which means that they're oldest ones. And it just totally freaks him out. Let me tell you where this is. First, just to give you an idea where St. Catherine's is. Here we are in the eastern Mediterranean. And as we zoom in, we're going to go way down to the bottom end of the Sinai Peninsula down there. He had done Turkey and Italy and all over Europe, Poland, looking for manuscripts, and finally decided, well, there are some convents in the Middle East. This one was quite prominent because it was put there with the people thinking that this is where the Ten Commandments came down on Sinai. So they put a convent there in the 500s. It's a really old place. And to commemorate that, if you go there now, there's a crossroads right there, and the convent is right up this little road between these nice mountains on either side. This is the traditional location of where the Ten Commandments were given, where Israel stayed where the convent is, and then Moses would go up the mountains on the right or left. We really don't know where it took place, but they figured this is as good as any. This is really nice on Google Earth. Some people make 3D buildings. They recreate 3D buildings to stick on the site, so that's the 3D building of St. Catherine's. So St. Catherine's is out in the middle of nowhere in the Sinai. Tischendorf ends up getting there and finds that there's a guy sitting with a basket, literally a basket of loose leaves that had been taken out of a codex, that had been sewn into a codex. They took them out and had put them in this basket, and this guy was feeding the fire with them. And he's just shocked, absolutely shocked. Here's David Roberts went through, about the same time that Tischendorf was there, Roberts went through and did paintings all over the Middle East, and so here's that. By the way, you won't find a door at the ground level of the convent for security reasons. So even when Tischendorf got there, he had to sign ahead to be able to get there, and they hoist him up up a rope and a little elevator on the outside. It's kind of tight security. And there's what it looks like on the inside. So it's a monastery that's been there since the mid-500s AD. Old place. So anyway, he goes in and he returns to Leipzig the next year, and he talks him into being able to take 43 of the sheets that were in the basket getting ready to be burned. He talks them into him being able to take those back home to Leipzig. The idea is that maybe what he can do is raise enough money and also publish these 43, because he realized it was a very old manuscript in the 4th century, and he could read enough of it to realize it was the Greek Old Testament. So probably the front end of this codex book. So they started peeling off pieces to burn from the beginning of the book, which is Genesis, and sort of worked their way in. So he takes that back and hoping to raise funds in order to see if there's more of these sheets, because if they were torn out sheets out of a codex, then maybe the codex is still there. That's what makes this really exciting. But he's run out of money. He goes back to Leipzig, which is kind of his hometown. He's German. Then in 1853, he makes his second visit. It takes that long. It takes 8 years to raise the money. He comes back to St. Catherine, and the whole intent is to find that original codex book that those leaves were taken out of, and maybe more of the leaves. But all he finds in that visit is a guy reading an old codex, and he's got a bookmark that's ripped off of a page from this codex and is being used as a bookmark. So the only things he finds is a little ripped piece of a bookmark. And that's all he finds in his entire visit. So somewhere in the convent, people are ripping these off as something, and he can't find where they are. So he goes back home after that, and the bookmark has Genesis 24 on it. So, oh my God. And it's penned like in the 300s. So anyway, he goes back. Although Tischendorf is German, he ends up talking the Tsar of Russia into funding his return trips. He can't get anyone in the West to be interested in this. And so the Tsar says, sure, I'll fund this. Go back and find out what's going on. And this is a really important connection. So he goes back for a third time in 59. And that's when, does anyone have their book on him? Or wait, here's one here. I'll just read this really quick, because this account is really hilarious. It's on page 47 in there, because he writes later on in life. He writes the entire account of what happened when he did all these things, and what a striking thing it was. So he says, after having devoted a few days in turning over the manuscripts of the convent, not without alighting here and there on some precious parchment or other, I told the Bedouins on the 4th of February to hold themselves in readiness to set out for the dromedaries for Cairo on the 7th. So he was ready to leave to go home. That's what it was. And to leave on the 7th, when an entirely fortuitous circumstance carried me at once to the goal of my desires. Woo! On the afternoon of this day, I was taking a walk with the steward of the convent in the neighborhood, and as he returned toward sunset, he begged me to take some refreshment with him in his cell. So scarcely had he entered the room when, resuming our former subject of conversation, he said, well, and I too have read a Septuagint, right? That's the Greek Old Testament. I too have read a Septuagint, i.e. a copy of the Greek translation made by the 70. And so saying, he took down from the corner of the room a bulky kind of volume wrapped up in red cloth and laid it before me. I unrolled the cover and discovered, to my great surprise, not only those very fragments which 15 years before I had taken out of the basket, but also other parts of the Old Testament, the New Testament complete, and in addition, the Epistle of Barnabas and a part of the Shepherd of Hermas, full of joy, which this time I had the self-command to conceal from my steward and the rest of the community. I asked, as if in a careless way, for permission to take the manuscript into my sleeping chamber, just to look it over a little bit more at leisure. He's acting cool, because the first time when he found those manuscripts in the basket, he got way excited, and they said, we have something valuable. So back in his room by myself, I could give away to the transport of joy which I felt. I knew that I held in my hand the most precious biblical treasure in existence, a document whose age and importance exceeded that of all the manuscripts that I had ever examined during 20 years of study on the subject. I cannot now, I confess, recall all the emotions which I felt in that exciting moment with such a diamond in my possession. So now he has the actual codex, the book, the bound book, where the front pages have been torn off for fires. And fortunately, the New Testament comes after the Old, so the New Testament was 100% intact. Wow. So here's the problem right here. How do you take something that valuable and somehow get it to the public, or somehow this is what he's been looking for 2 decades. How do you do this without making these guys too excited about the fact that they have something that's priceless? So playing that game is what he had to do next. So he talked them into, see, he said, I don't want to take this from you, but what I do want to do is maybe just take this and have it copied. Can we just copy it? We're going to hand copy it, and that's all we want to do. But unfortunately, I don't have the resources here, the people here to do the copying. So can we relocate it to Cairo? And if we move it to Cairo, then it'll be there only as long as it takes for us to translate it. So they grudgingly said okay to do that. So they take it to Cairo, and they put it on a donkey, and they carry it to Cairo, and they copy the thing literally letter for letter, and it's 110,000 lines of stuff they copied by hand in Cairo. And then using those copies, he went and did a typeset replica a few years later. So he takes the copies. We think that the original is still sitting in Cairo. From this point, it's hard to track the original. But he takes those copies, the hand-printed copies, goes to Europe, and he actually has them typeset, like we do today with lead type. They had to invent a couple of new characters because there were no characters that represented some of them they found in the text. So, and this is it right here. There's the front page. When it was done, they did 300 typeset copies. This is one of them. And because, this is kind of important to look important, you do it all in Latin. So it's Codex Sinaiticus, that's the Latin version of it. You go down, there's Alexander II, the Tsar. So he gets second billing, Alexander II. And then there's Tischendorf's name right down there. And then right down here in Roman numerals, it's MDCCC, that's 1800 LXII 62. So it's 1862. So that's the cover. And this is what it looks like on the inside. So they typeset it. And then published 300 of them. One of the best things he could have ever done. I mean, this is every single page that was left in the codex, they hand typeset and then printed copies. And a handful of these still exist around the world. They're actually quite precious. But that's what it looks like in a typeset version. So he gets that done. Now the original, after that gets printed, the original, this is where it gets a little iffy, and it's Tischendorf's kind of this burden he carries because no one's exactly sure what happened. But the original is given as a gift to the Tsar as a way of thanking him. So, however, the monks in the monastery at St. Catherine's didn't want to let go of it at all. So how is it that the manuscript, the original manuscript that he got in St. Catherine's, how did that get away from the hands of the monks and into the hands of Alexander II? Really not too sure. and of course, Russia at the time claimed they gave them tens of thousands of rubles to pay for it. Not sure about that. Anyway, the monks are not happy that the Russian Tsar now has this original, but that's how it goes, and that's how Tischendorf kind of played the game in order to get these things to move around and make his copy. And he didn't really care if the original went off to Alexander and went into Russia and then went into who knows where. He just didn't care because he had these great typesetting replicas. So he only cared about what was inside of them. So that's where we go. By the way, Alexander II, there he is, dead. This is the guy that sold to America, Alaska. That's the guy. And he had so many death threats on his life. I think he had something like 5 or 6 attempts on his life because he was so unpopular in Russia, so unpopular. And so the last attempt on his life was a bomb. A guy threw a bomb at his carriage. It rolled under the carriage. The carriage was armored on the bottom, so it just messed up the carriage, but no one got hurt. Alexander comes out of the carriage out onto the street. Another guy with a bomb knows that he's the backup guy, is if Alexander survives, throw your bomb. So once Alexander comes out of his carriage, this guy throws his bomb up. It cuts both of Alexander's legs off. There's shrapnel over his body. He lives for about another 5 hours. And they find out that there's a third guy in the crowd that has a third backup bomb too, just in case. So that was not Alexander's day. He, by the way, he was a contemporary of Lincoln. That's the time we're talking about. So, yeah. So anyway, somewhere the Tsar has that. Today, it's in the British Museum or the British Library. In 1933, see, I got up there Stalin's thing. Stalin had several 5-year plans in the central planning, and they needed money. So they said, well, we've got this stupid old Bible. Maybe we can sell this to somebody. They put word out. Word got out to the UK. The UK said, we'll buy that from you. Set a price. They set a price. And then in the UK in 1933, they said, well, we don't have enough disposable cash to do this. So they put word out to the public and said, here is this priceless copy of the Bible that was written in the 4th century. We can buy this. We need to do a public fundraising. So in 1932 and 33, they did a public fundraising to raise as much money as possible, and a little over half of the cost of the Bible was raised from public funds. So when the Bible was actually brought from Russia into the UK, there was this huge welcoming ceremonies. It came down the streets. It was in a carriage and then in a car and armed guards, and they came over to the British Museum. It was a huge spectacle. It was covered on radio, this Bible that they finally purchased, and it kind of was put into the British Museum. Today it's changed its name. It's the British Library, but still, that was a huge coup. No one thought that those 300 typeset copies, no one thought that the original that was from existed until they saw this and said, this is the same Bible that Tischendorf had it copied from. So it goes in the British Library, and then in the last couple decades, they did this online kind of thing with it. Lightfoot in the book said, he says, the Sinaitic manuscript is the oldest complete manuscript of the New Testament that exists today. So the New Testament that you have in your hands, even the order that's put in there, is exactly what comes out of Sinaiticus that was penned, pretty sure, between 340 and 360. So you can directly tie your New Testament back to this document to the 300s without question. It's just no one questions that. And it's complete. So they're doing this thing in the British Library right now where they put it online, and you can now go online and see it. I'll talk about it in just a second. They went back in 1975, 40 years later. Someone said, maybe we should go back and see if there's more documents there. And actually, the reason that they went back in 75, what triggered it was there was an announcement out of St. Catherine's that a big collapse of the building had happened. There was a fire. A whole wing of the place kind of had collapsed in on itself because of the fire. And that in cleaning out from that, they found manuscripts in the rubble. So when that hit the news, then the people in the British Library said, we got to go out there and see what's in the rubble. They found more leaves from the front of Sinaiticus in the rubble. I know, they should just sift the whole place. And they thought they'd had, but they found more stuff, as well as a whole bunch of other interesting manuscripts, very old manuscripts that they figured had been tucked into a back room of the convent. One of the things that they used to do there, as well as down in Alexandria, is if you had really valuable fragments or sheets of fragments of writings, if you thought they were valuable, you didn't burn them and you didn't catalog them. What you did is you sort of stuck them into a room that wouldn't be disturbed. And in another convent, wasn't a convent, I think, but down in Alexandria, the room you couldn't even have access to, there was just like a little mail slot in the room, and you'd stick your pages in there so no one would get them and no one would know they're there. And those were found. So it was kind of one of those rooms. So when this place burned down and collapsed, that room was opened up and they found the manuscripts. Weird. And again, they found missing Old Testament pages because the front of the book had been ripped out. So that made sense. Okay, so now 2006, Codex Sinaiticus project started online, and this is an attempt by the British Library. They said, okay, we own the original text, we own the codex, but we want everyone to be able to look at it and research it independently without coming to the British Library, because they were getting swamped by requests from people to come to the British Library, look at the document, do stuff. So instead they said, we're going to put it online, and we're going to do the best job we can think of putting it online, and it is really cool. So you can go online and read Sinaiticus. There's the guys in charge of the project, and they're putting it online. And this is actually an image I took offline of looking at a photograph, a close photograph of Sinaiticus. So there's Sinaiticus, the same one that Tischendorf found in the 1860s, the same one that was penned around 350 AD. There it is. You can see the ink that's falling off of it and stuff like that. By the way, at the time of Tischendorf, when Tischendorf found this, there was a guy who was a very well-known forger at the time in the 1860s who claimed that what Tischendorf found was one of his forgeries. And that sparked a huge, huge debate publicly. And one of the things that finally found out that the fact that he did not forge this was original, was how the ink was falling off the letters. He couldn't exactly replicate that. He did it sort of, but not exactly. So when they saw that, they said, no, you didn't do it. Now, interestingly enough, too, if you look at how well framed these characters are, I mean, look at that Zeta. That's just awesome. This is done in a professional sense, and many people think that these copies were commissioned right after the Council of Nicaea, which was 325. These are about 340, about that time, and so they got a very expensive vellums, calf leather, very expensive vellums, and the best scribes ever. And when you look at these, they are extraordinarily good scribes. I mean, really good scribes. They think about 3 different scribes did it. You can actually tell the handwriting slightly between them. So here's the online page. If you go and look at it, there's the Codex Sinaiticus. And it's really fascinating to look at, because what they did was they not only processed the pages they have in the British Library, they process the pages that are from the same codex that are spread around the world. Like, remember those original 43 leaves that he took out of the basket and brought home? Those are in Leipzig, but they're still part of the codex. So they included the Leipzig collection, the 43 there, as well as, where's the other one? The National Library of Russia has some more leaves as well. So all the leaves of this one sewn together codex are sort of spread around. The British Library is the biggest, and then there's the other pieces. So they did this process on all of the leaves they know of in existence from this one codex book. And they put it online. You can search through it by verses. I thought, I wonder what Revelation looks like. So this is the beginning of Revelation right here. And they give you a photo of that. You can zoom in on that. It gives you the text down here. It gives you the known, the Greek, the lowercase Greek version of that uppercase Greek, as you see it right there. This style of Greek on the upper right is what people who come out of seminary used to reading. It's the lowercase. It's not the uncial Greek. But so they translated from uppercase uncial from the 340s to lowercase uncials, not uncial, just lowercase Greek, which is more common from the 6th century on. So, and then I thought, well, let's take a look, see if I can read some of it. So I looked at the very beginning. This is the beginning of Revelation up here. And I know that the beginning of Revelation says the revelation of Jesus Christ. And the word revelation is apocalypse, literally. I mean, in Greek, you know Greek, apocalypsis. So I went up there to look at, and you can see A-P, there's the pi for P, apocalypsis. Ooh, I can read Greek. So there's the Revelation apocalypsis that's written in 340 AD on the page. And they've translated it into English. How about that? So it's extraordinarily fun. It's a fun thing to do, to go and just sift through what they've got online for that. And I think is that all I have? Oh, okay, one other PS. We're going to go LDS just for a second, because I want to show you what a contrast this really is. We were just reading a page from 340 AD of Revelation. You can do the whole New Testament, every single book of the New Testament. You can do this in this 340 AD document. Now, the Pearl of Great Price, which Joseph Smith bought off a traveling salesman who was selling mummies as well as papyruses that were with the mummies. These were papyruses that were stuck with the mummies. He translated into the Book of Abraham. But what's interesting is that there's a picture on these papyruses, and this is actually a photograph of the fragment that Joseph Smith has. Okay, he's got a fragment of actually, it's a relatively good length scroll. I think it's about 6 feet of scroll. But this is on it. This picture is in there, and this is a picture of that piece of Joseph Smith's manuscript. Okay, and what's missing is there's missing sections right there of the papyrus. That's missing, and also up here on the upper left, that's missing. So when he takes this picture and he has someone transcribe it by hand into the Times and Seasons, which is the newspaper of the LDS Church at the time, he wants this picture to be in there. So he fills in the parts that are ripped out with this. So that's what gets published in Times and Seasons. And so sure enough, the stuff in the red circles on the left are things that he just supposed what was part of the ripped out papyrus. However, when you get standard funerary texts from that time of Egypt for almost 500 to 1,000 years, this picture is almost there every time. And what's on the picture are these. It's Anubis. So the guy that's standing on the left is Anubis. He should have a jackal head. But when Joseph Smith guessed, he gave him a human head. So, I mean, in every case, because Anubis, the god Anubis, he was always connected with the preparation for mummification, the burial rites and stuff like that. So whenever you had a picture scene of the body being prepared for burial, Anubis was there doing this kind of stuff. So this is Anubis preparing the bodies. This one's very close right here, actually, to the Joseph Smith one. It's almost identical. There's a few things that are different, but you can see there's just a lot of things that he got wrong in guessing about that. Plus, underneath the bodies, there's these jars. See the jars? And there are in Joseph Smith's as well. No jars there. I don't know why there's jars there. That's where various body parts were taken out of the body and put in the jars. You'd evacuate the entire body and then stuff it back with stuff. Everything inside. You'd hollow out the body. Yeah. Heart and lungs and liver, everything would go in jars underneath. Now, what's interesting is when you read Joseph Smith's explanation of what he's seeing in the picture, it's totally wrong, because this is Abraham sacrificing Isaac in his picture. No, it's Anubis preparing a body for burial, and the jars on the bottom are full of body parts. So anyway, for people who are familiar with burial scripts, from Egypt, as soon as they saw that picture of what Joseph Smith published, they looked at those two elements and said, well, those are totally wrong. That doesn't fit anything we've ever seen. And then when they go back and look at the original papyrus, it's because those parts didn't survive. This is really damning, actually. So, anyway, I just wanted to show you that because this is so radically different from what we just saw with Sinaiticus. It's so radically different that it's almost laughable. By the way, the Book of Abraham stuff is not, the text isn't quite as controversial as this, because this is just flat out wrong. It's just wrong. So, okay, so we're done. How about some questions?